Let's dive into another powerful fault tolerance pattern, which is the retry mechanism. We will be using Resilience4j for the implementation mechanism in Spring Boot. If you've ever had your API fail due to a temporary glitch and wish your system could just try again, this one's for you. The retry mechanism is a simple yet super effective resiliency pattern. When a request to an external service fails, instead of failing immediately, the system will retry the request, hoping that the issue is temporary and will be solved by the next request. Let's take a real-life example. Imagine you're calling a friend and the call doesn't connect the first time. Do you give up? Probably not. You try again in a few seconds, and that's the retry logic. Software systems work similarly, especially when dealing with flaky services or networks. Now, how do we add this retry logic in a Spring Boot app without cluttering our code with try, catch, and loops? The solution is Resilience4j, a lightweight, easy-to-use library for implementing retry and other resiliency mechanisms. Before going to the Spring Boot code example, please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it allows me to make more interesting videos for you. Let me now show you how to implement a retry mechanism in a Spring Boot application using Resilience4j. I've created a simple project using the Spring Initializer website. Let me show you the dependencies. So we have the Resilience4j dependency, which is quite important. That's where the retry mechanism code is from. We need the AOP dependency. I've also added Lombok for logging. And then we've got the typical Spring Boot starter web. So this application is something I've already created in other videos about Resilience4j. So what I've done is I've already created a controller, service, and a client class, and we're going to focus on this client class. Before that, let me just quickly show you through the code. So in our controller, we have a get endpoint, which is calling a method in the service class. And then in the service class, we have auto-wired a weather client. This weather client is the one making the third-party endpoint call. In here, we're going to call a method inside the weather client to get the weather for a city. But what we're going to do is simulate an error. Let's now go into the weather client and let's complete this class. So the first thing we're going to be doing is creating this public method. GetWeather is going to accept a city as input, and then we're going to add a log so that we can see how many times this gets called and if our retry mechanism is actually working. Now we're going to use a REST template to make a call to a third-party endpoint and simulate an error. So we're going to be using this endpoint over here. So let me show you what this does. This is basically a REST API that you can just call using your browser. And depending on the code you pass, this is an HTTP code, is going to return you the desired result. So let's say we want a 500, we're going to pass a 500. If you wanted a 404, you can just pass a 404. And if you wanted a 200 request, you can just pass a 200 and it's going to return you an OK. So this is quite useful for testing this retry mechanism. So we are first going to retry with 500 and let's see what happens. Right now we don't have any retry mechanism, but I want to show you what happens in this case. Let's create a run configuration, call it retry. Let's select the main class, apply and OK. Let's run this. So this has started successfully. Now if you go to Postman and we call the endpoint we have created, let's see what happens. So the request goes through, but as you can see it returns a 500 and this does not look really nice. And if we go to our application logs, we can see that the external weather service was called for the city we passed, but it returned a 500. So this code was not able to try again. To retry this request, we're going to be using Resilience4j. And to do that, we are going to add a tag called retry, and we're going to give it a name. I'll call it getWeatherRetry. And then we're also going to provide a fallback method. And simply, let's create this fallback method. So in this fallback method, you can have anything you want really. It doesn't have to be a default message. You can even call a secondary API if you've got one. In this case, I'm just going to return this message. Really, this is a fallback, as the name says. So we have added a retry mechanism, and this retry is from the Resilience4J library. We gave it a name and the fallback method. Make sure this fallback method is the same as the one you have defined in the retry. The last thing that is left for this retry to work is actually adding some application.properties that are going to define the behavior of the retry. So these are the properties we're going to be adding. So this is an instance level application.property, and as you can see, this is the same name we gave to our retry mechanism over here. So we define the maximum number of retries, we define the duration between each retry, and then we also define when we want this retry mechanism to come in action. So in this case, we want it to come in action when there is a HTTP server error exception. And that's all you need. There are different mechanisms that you can also add, such as a backoff retry, which exponentially increases the wait time. But in this case, we're just going to use this one. So if I restart the application, and if we now go to Postman, you can already see that the request is taking longer than the initial time. Let's wait for this to finish, and then we'll go to the logs of our Spring Boot app. So we can already see that the fallback mechanism is working correctly, and we've got that message here. And if we go to the logs, we can see that the mechanism tried to call the external endpoint 3 times, but it failed. So what this is trying to achieve is simply retrying an endpoint call. In a real-world example, let's say there was a network glitch and 2 requests failed. And when we come to try the third one, this might be going through correctly, and we will be able to return a result to our user. So that's where you really see the benefits of this retry mechanism. So one thing I also want to show you is that if this endpoint returns a 200, this retry mechanism is not going to come in action because there is no exception being thrown by this third-party API. So if I restart the application, let's call the endpoint, and this time it was okay, the fallback mechanism was not invoked. And this line of code is all you need to implement a retry mechanism in your Spring Boot application. As you can see, this retry mechanism was applied to the client class, where we're actually making the third-party API call using the REST template. That's it, you've added automatic retry logic to your Spring Boot service in a clean and maintainable way. You can also combine the retry mechanism with a circuit breaker. And Resilience4J keeps your code neat and your service is resilient. If you found this video useful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more.